Before we get into the story, I want you to do something for me. Imagine a field full of horses, only the horses aren't standing up. They're all laying down. It's because these horses are no longer alive. And in this field is an army of journalists beating those dead horses relentlessly. And that's how I felt a couple days ago when I did the video about calling out the BS and, politics. And I made a kind of follow-up yesterday, and that's how I feel. I feel like the media, they've said what needs to be said. They've talked about all of these policy positions. They've talked about Trump and his scandals, and now they just keep doing the same thing. And the final straw for me was Ukraine Gate. All right, this big scandal with Trump and Ukraine, which I hate talking about. It is literally Russia Gate 2, Ukrainian Boogaloo. Well, what happens when there is literally nothing but a field of dead horses? I hope you guys understand the idiom, being a dead horse, right? So when you're literally doing nothing, the horse is already dead. Get it? Well, there's only one thing you can do. Make it up! And there have been some overt stories that are outright fake, and they've been called out, but those are rare. There have been a lot of corrections. There's a lot of the media, what they'll do is they'll jump the gun on the story and just say, people familiar with the president's thinking have said. Or they'll say, the other day with the fake AOC supporter rallying and saying all that nonsense, they say, someone on Twitter claimed it was them, therefore it's true. Now, granted, in that case, they get lucky. They roll the dice. Eventually, they found more evidence to back up their claim. But the media does this. They jump the gun on the story, and boy, have I said it a lot lately, 24 hours later, retraction. Well, now the New York Times is being slammed because they published a fake discussion. It's like a fake interview. Well, maybe interview is the wrong word, but that's the best way I can put it. It's a fake conversation, an imagined conversation with Flyover Man. Flyover Man, to the best of my abilities, would be better described as straw man Trump supporter. For those that aren't familiar with, I think most of you know what straw man means, but just to be fair, it's basically the New York Times is setting up a man made of straw with a Trump hat, the MAGA hat, and then they go and lightly tap it to knock it over and say, we've won. This story is ridiculous, but it's indicative of a bigger problem with the media. They've lost touch with reality. And I'm going to go through and break down exactly why I believe that to be the case. See, the New York Times has been in a really weird place. Publishing the Kavanaugh story they did was bunk. The book didn't sell. This is crazy. So you remember that whole controversy where the New York Times put out the story saying there's a new accusation against Kavanaugh. It's just not true. There's no corroborating evidence. And it was all to promote this book. And then the women who wrote the book went all these TV shows. It's not selling. Apparently it sold a couple thousand copies. Flop. Hard flop. See, the media has lost touch with reality. And in this, as I've mentioned many times before, the Democrats chase after them. So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to go through some stories, and I want to start with just lightly reading into the problems of the New York Times Flyover Man story, which is now getting flack from everybody. The criticism being, look, they've run out of things to talk about. I genuinely believe that. Okay, how many times can I say it's insane the Democrats proposed giving non-citizens health care? We've said it. It's been said. Don't need to say it again. How many times do I need to say that impeachment is unpopular and it's going to backfire? Even Van Jones now is saying it on CNN. It's a lose-lose for Democrats. And it's we get it. We get it. I mean, I understand not everybody watches every single video and knows every single thing, but at a certain point, you just got to say, man, let's write a human interest piece about a bakery's new flavor of cookie, right? Let's talk about something else. Well, the New York Times decided we're going to stick with politics, but we're going to make it up. As long as we tell people it's imagined in the first place. It's just so silly to me. So let's read this a little bit. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There's multiple ways you can do it. You can check that out. But the best thing you can do, share this video. And I really do mean that. I have frequently done tests on whether, when I promote, ask people to share versus when I don't. And seriously, YouTube, my second channel is hard deranked. This channel has actually been doing better. I don't know what that means, but I do know that when you guys really share, it has a seriously positive impact. So I really do appreciate it. It's the best thing you can do. Let's read. The New York Times, David Brooks writes, why Trump voters stick with him. An imagined conversation with Flyover Man. And the first thing they do is set up this straw man implying that Trump supporters really do think Trump is completely corrupt and that it's okay because at least the corrupt guy is working for them. It's a straw man. It's just not the case. I know because I've talked to Trump supporters. I talk to them regularly. And I talk to people who don't like the president fairly regularly. Urban Guy says, I hope you read the rough transcript of that Trump phone call with the Ukrainian president. Trump clearly used public power to ask a foreign leader to dig up dirt on his political opponent. This is impeachable. I don't see how you can deny the facts in front of your face. Fake point made by fake Urban Guy. Fake Flyover Man says, I haven't really had time to look into it. Are you kidding me? Is that the first thing you say? I assure you, Trump supporters are paying attention to this. First problem, the assumption that Trump supporters don't care and don't pay attention is the opposite of what I have experienced. Listen, there are people on the right who don't pay attention, 100%. There are people on the right who just don't believe the report when it comes out. I get it. There are people on the left who also do the exact same thing. It's a silly game. But in my experience, what I've found is that most people I know who are voting for Bernie or Democrat don't know anything about this. I'd be willing to bet a substantial sum of money that if you gave me 10 anti-Trump people and 10 Trump people, the 10 Trump people would be closer to accurate than the anti-Trump people. Not that they would be completely accurate, just slightly closer. And in that capacity, I mean, if I go to a Trump supporter and say, did you read the transcript? They'll probably be like, I glanced through it. If I go to someone who doesn't like Trump, they'll be like, I heard Adam Schiff. You see what I mean? There is a genuine gap in the independent individuals sorting through of news, okay? You look at the narrative from independent commentary, and it's typically balanced between moderate and conservative. Me being more moderate, and you have more conservative channels, Steven Crowder, etc. And my commentary is like, usually I'm not a fan of Trump, the Republicans, and a lot of the things he's doing. I don't need to get into that because the media does a million times per day. But you look to the mainstream media, CNN, and even to an extent Fox News, and you will see that generic, typically uninformed opinion or misframed bias against the president. I think this is because the media is desperate for money. So that's kind of the main point, right? He says, the big picture is we knew this guy was a snake. Whoa, full stop. I don't know very many Trump supporters who would call Trump a snake. I've talked to many people who voted for the president who said they don't like his attitude, they don't like his character, but typically the things you hear from Trump supporters is that they don't think Trump is a snake. They think he's actually fighting on their behalf. This is creating the fake narrative that Trump's base are uninformed people who think he's corrupt, but don't care. Because our kids are in trouble, I had one shot and I made a deal with the devil. Well, I'm not going to read through this. You get the point. In the end, the New York Times columnist David Brooks is mocked for creating imaginary Flyover Man Trump supporter. But it's not just that. He's getting mocked for Urban Guy too, because he created a caricature of both people. This is the point I'm making. The New York Times is scraping the bottom of the barrel. It's an analogy I truly love. They're scraping so hard at the bottom that they're pulling up wood shavings. There's nothing left. They literally made up a conversation. It is the driest. It is the most. It is absolutely ridiculous. Well, it's not the most ridiculous thing we've seen. We've seen free speech is killing us by the New York Times. Wow. Bravo, opinion section. What an excellent statement. Nobody agrees with. Well, I shouldn't say nobody because a lot of people do. But in this story, they say that the blue checks of Twitter attacked New York Times columnist David Brooks for his latest column attempting to explain how a Trump voter in middle America views the president's potential impeachment. We get the point. Now the New York Times is being dragged across the coals because, they kind of just made up a fake story. And one of my favorite criticisms was that the New York Times is paying David Brooks ungodly sums of money to just make things up. Yeah, congratulations. But let's get real. One of the most dangerous things that's happening in this country is a complete fracture from reality. And this is what I talked about yesterday on my second channel. You may have not seen it, but I mentioned how we had one story that said we have a record economy. And then you go to Vox and they say it's bad news for the president. And I say, how do you go from record-breaking economy, 50-year low unemployment, and say it's bad news? Well, because this month there was 16,000 less jobs created. So it's a slowdown, and the slowdown is bad. Therefore, this is bad news for Trump. And I'm like, dude, that is scraping the bottom of the barrel and pulling up shavings. Like, come on, you're stretching things. Now, I don't think I'm perfect. I think there have been instances where I've probably done something similar. My analysis has probably been bad, and many people might assume that when I say something like Trump is going to win 2020, that I'm just saying that. They'll be like, Tim's only saying that to pander to Trump supporters. I don't care. I think you'd be nuts to think Trump's going to lose. And one of the big reasons is the analogy I gave you at the beginning of this video. The media has said what can be said. Think about the Democrats. Actually, there was a really great tweet. It said this: can anyone name anything from the third debate? No. Like, can you repeat any quote? Was there anything said that was memorable in any way? No. Nothing happened and no one cared. And that was really interesting to me because, yeah, I can't. I sat there. I think I was playing on my phone for the most part. Like, yeah, it's been said. How many times do we need to hear Bernie say Medicare for all? How many times do we need to hear the media repeat the same talking point 5 billion times? See, here's what's interesting. We are in an unprecedented era. This level of information overload wasn't even, like, it's escalating, right? In 2016, we were seeing one of the first times the democratization of politics and speech was going to have an impact on the presidency. Technically, Obama was. Obama used Facebook to rally people, but at the time, it was still young. We are now in the most intense we've ever seen, and it's only going to get more intense, information overload. Here's the thing. 10, 15 years ago, right? They would say that somebody would go up on stage at a debate and say, I want to do this. And then the conversation around that could only be broken up over a few months because you'd have an article written in the paper, it'd appear in the paper, it'd appear on a website, and then a few days later, you'd see like an update or rebuttal. Today, it's instant, nonstop, and it's every second of every day. Bernie Sanders on stage, when he says, we're going to give healthcare to non-citizens, you already have 8 million rebuttals instantly on Twitter. So we've all heard it. It's all been said. The negotiating has stopped. What more is going to happen? You're not going to convince anybody. We're seeing it's the democratization of information. The internet has allowed this, allowed channels like mine to exist, my opinions. And so we're now we're struggling how to figure out, how do we quantify what someone is, left, right, up, down, whatever. They're slamming Bill Maher right now as a phony liberal. There's an article, and I think I'll read that later today. It's around 6 p.m. But they don't know. It used to be that everyone had a little bit they shared but disagreed on a lot. But because of the internet, we can all rally around specific concepts, and thus you end up with very specific sects or sections of various tribes, and it kind of breaks down, and there's some overlap, and it's getting weird. I'm clearly not a conservative, but I don't like the Democrats, for the most part. I like Yang and Tulsi. They're okay. Marianne's pretty much, I think Marianne Williamson is kind of a sweetheart, but I don't agree with a lot of her policy ideas. I think she's nice, and I think it's mean what the media does to her. But I clearly don't fit in, and so we've called it politically homeless, but the reality is the people like Ruben or Bridget Fatassi, or, sorry, I can't pronounce your name, it's probably wrong, and me, don't really fit in any place, but we still are kind of moderate centrist liberals. And so, look, the people who believe what we believe, we exist and we form our own space. So here's what I want to show you in terms of the media, because I'll make a long video. We'll see what happens. The New York Times knows that they have to play this game. They have to set up a straw man. They have to make Trump look bad. Cancel NYT Trends as Americans slam the New York Times for outing Trump whistleblower as CIA officer. And the reality is, the New York Times did lose subscribers in the wake of the whistleblower story controversy. So the New York Times knows that they have a very urban demographic. Thus, urban guy is the smart one saying, we know Trump did wrong. And the question arises about this fake story. Why can't the New York Times just ask a Trump supporter to write an article? Is it that complicated? You want to hear about an argument from somebody as to why they defend Trump? It's great. I can name several people off the top of my head who are Trump supporters with large followings and would gladly write you an article explaining what they think and why they think it. Instead, what they do is they take urban guy who clearly knows of the wrongdoing, and they create a straw man of this Trump guy who knows Trump is also the devil and doing wrong, but is going to vote for him anyway. And it's literally not the argument. But the media does this because they know they'll lose subscribers, in my opinion, if they don't actually, if they don't play to the audience they've cultivated. And it's weird how scared they are of Twitter. It's weird, right? But, when you cultivate an audience, don't be surprised when you do real journalism and you lose people. There's a couple other stories that I definitely want to highlight, right? Following this controversy and the subscriber loss, they quietly revealed that controversial Sarah Jeong is off the editorial board. The reason this is significant is because it was believed she was removed after she stated the New York Times really does take a look at their subscriptions, and that impacts whether or not they think they've done wrong. That's a really interesting point to be made. Now, I will stress, she was apparently removed from the editorial board or quit. She's still a contractor there. I don't believe she was fired. It's not the case. She left in August. But the reason I highlight this is because the point she made as someone at the New York Times, she said straight up, when the New York Times sees subscriber loss, they take action. What this says to me is exactly what we heard from the creators of South Park. He said this, right here, I love this. I feel bad for television critics and cultural critics, he explains. They may have laughed like hell at Dave Chappelle, and then they went home and they know that they have to write to keep, they know what they have to write to keep their job. So when I read TV reviews or cultural reviews, I think of someone in prison writing. I think about somebody writing a hostage note. This is not what they think. This is what they have to do to keep their job in a social media world, so I don't hold it against them. Well, I'll tell you what, I don't. I literally don't. Now, there is a reality that some opinions are more safe than others. It just so happens that I happen to be, a moderate centrist leaning to the left, and so most of my opinions are acceptable in the Overton window. And there are a lot of people with opinions that are unacceptable and will be purged from YouTube. But in the end, I can freely express my opinion and tell whoever I want, I can call them, for the most part, whatever I want. I can't swear and stuff. I've never been a big swearer in the first place. But I can do that. I can freely talk about these things. I can say Joker was a great movie, and I don't have to worry about woke outrage. We're now seeing in this thread of criticism about why all of these media companies follow this line. The important thing you need to understand is the overlap of the cultural and the political. We've seen people say that, the personal is political and what you do. They are really trying to make sure that no matter what happens, everything is about politics. To an extent, I will always self-reflect and say, I know, I understand. I play this, to an extent too. I try to be above and beyond, but of course I'm not perfect, right? But we can see this in how the reviews for Joker have turned. Many left-wing outlets are criticizing it. And this was following a statement where Phillips, the director of Joker, said it's because of this outrage. But he said something important. And it's not so much about the Joker. It's when he said, I don't want to offend you. It's hard to argue with 30 million people on Twitter. Let's rope this back to the political realm and see the overlap between the cultural and the political. What happens when Twitter, which is a fringe faction of the fringe left and not the majority of people, will cancel you if you don't toe the line? The media toes the line, and the politicians follow right after, thinking it's popular. It is not popular. We know this from polls. We know that impeachment is not popular. We know that there was a study put out by the New York Times. They did a survey, an experimental survey, where they had a control group that read random information and a control group that read information about how the Democrats are pushing far left, and immediately they lost the moderates. So what ends up happening is the Twitter outrage emerges, and you end up with this: the New York Times trying to cater to this base. First, we see this story about Urban Guy knowing Trump is bad, and it's framed in this ridiculous way, when the New York Times could have simply hired a Trump supporter. I'm not surprised then the New York Times would actually publish this. Free speech is killing us, they say. It's the most absurd and obnoxious argument I've ever heard. But think about what happens then with the breakdown, with the canceling of subscriptions, the loss of revenue. We can see how the media begins to fail. Notably, in this story, they hilariously referred to Section 230 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which is not a thing. Where are the New York Times fact checkers? It seems like they really are collapsing. Like they're losing what made them a great institution of knowledge and information. And it may be because dwindling revenues. I don't know. I think it might be because they're scraping the bottom of the barrel. They know that they have to cater to this new audience they've built and the audience of Twitter, which holds them hostage. So they bring on speakers with insane opinions that are not popular. And this person clearly has no idea what they're talking about. This story actually refers to a law that does not exist, a mishmash of random ideas that was just absolutely incorrect. And I have personal experience with this author, the writer of this piece, doing the same thing to me. He took two ideas, DMCA, which is something totally different, and the Communications Decency Act, and mashed them together, made a mistake. How does this article this ill-informed person end up writing an insane article that says free speech is killing us, with his first line being, "There has never been a bright line between word and deed." It's one of the most insane things I've ever heard, but it lines up with Twitter. The Twitter mob that truly believes we should censor the speech and things like this ends up in the New York Times. Twitter is dictating all of this, but it is a fringe minority. Now I love this. Check this out. How Fox News twisted the Kavanaugh scandal into a way to attack the New York Times. It's because the Kavanaugh scandal was the New York Times failing to include a caveat that the woman who allegedly experienced something at the hands of Kavanaugh 1, 2, 3, 4 says she has no recollection of that event at all. And they added the correction later. All of a sudden now, Vox playing the same game. No, they have to play the trope to defend, the accusations or whatever claims. Fox News called it a correction. I'm sorry. In an interview with The Hill, the authors called the update a correction as well. And we can still see that it's not always bad. CNN, New York Times botched Kavanaugh story, the latest in a series of blunders from the opinion section. So at least you can still see the CNN calling out these bigger stories and calling out the New York Times for the problems they make. Now we'll start wrapping up, right? I think I've hit the main points about the New York Times publishing the fake stories. It's only going to get worse. I like the analogy of I really, really do love scraping wood shavings off the bottom of a barrel, punching a hole in it, and then you don't have a barrel anymore. There's nothing left. There's nothing there. I don't know where we go from here. I really don't. I've talked about it 3 times, 2 days ago, yesterday, and today, because every day I read the news and I read these stories, I'm just like, dude, I get it, man. And at a certain point, I feel like, who wants to hear me say the same thing for the 50th time? Some people have said that I get repetitive in videos, and I understand sometimes I'll reiterate things to try and connect points. But I think it's actually fair when you look at the press as a whole. And I look at my YouTube list and I'm like, I did this video last week. How am I already here again? And it's not because I thought of it. It's because I'm reading the news and reading the same recycled nonsense over and over again. The New York Times Kavanaugh book bombs. 3,120 sold. Amazon rank 6,795. My understanding is that the Molly Hemingway book of The Federalist actually did extremely well. But I want to tell you why I think this happened. How many times do we need to hear the same thing? I think the answer is not very many. Twice is enough. But the Kavanaugh story is a year old. The story in it was actually old. And it's the same thing over and over again. It's like there's nothing original left. That's why I said, Russiagate 2, Ukrainian Boogaloo. Do I really want to hear about these hearings? Do I really want to hear about these subpoenas? Been there, done that, and I'm over it. I do not need to say the same thing to you that I said last time. It's the same thing. It reminds me of in a video game, right? I don't know how many of you play video games, but you know how there'll be one bad guy, and it's on level 1, you'll encounter a bad guy. And then on level 10, it's the same bad guy, but green. And so this delineates it. You know that the green version is tougher. All games do this, right? Playing Mario, you've got the green Koopas and the red Koopas. Same animation, slightly different colors, slightly different behavior, different stats. And that's what I feel like we're seeing. All of these scandals, all of these talking points are just them reintroducing the exact same thing. But it's interesting. I don't know how the debates can continue to function. That's why Trump wins, I think. One of the reasons Trump wins. I don't want to act like there's one reason he does. But you think about what Trump does when he says to Hillary, you'd be in jail. He's bringing something new and exciting to the stage, something that feels more visceral, something that feels more real. It's the same for YouTube and why people watch my content. As many researchers have stated, it's more so a personal connection. You know that I'll read a lot of your comments. I can't read all of them because there's thousands. And you know that it feels more like I'm talking to you directly. YouTube is this much more personal space relative to the stodgy script reading that is Fox News. I have no script, literally nothing. This is all off the top of my head. I never write anything down. I just pull up the stories, I think about things, and then I rant. And that has something more visceral, and I think that is the big change. So when you see a book about Kavanaugh, you're like, I don't care. I really don't. Nobody buys it. In the end, expect to see more of the same. I'm actually going to do my best to avoid a lot of the stories that are being chased after. Because here's I'll be honest. You know, as we started entering political season, I thought it would be important to break down the biggest stories of the day. And that's why a lot of my videos are specifically about Ukraine impeachment in the past several days. And before that, what the Democrats are doing. Because I kind of felt like you're going to get the narrative from the left, you're going to get the narrative from the right, and I want to give you my personal take on it, which is probably not going to align with a lot of the Democrats because they've kind of lost it. But then eventually we get to a point where, as they just don't have anything left to say, I end up repeating myself as well. And after like the third time, I was like, I'm done. I'm not going to do this. So I'll leave you with that. And the New York Times, in an effort to just make something, just made it up because there's nothing else to say. And I don't know what else to expect. You know, they're talking about subpoenaing the president. They're talking about the scandals. And I'm just like, dude, I get it. It's just a repeat of the last several years. What can I tell you? No idea. But I'm going to do better to try and avoid this mess and this nonsense and actually talk about things that I think are important. So I'll leave you there. Thanks for hanging out. Stick around. Next segment will be coming up at youtube.com/TimCastNews at 6 p.m. I will see you all in the next segment.